Hello and welcome to T2RL Talks. Today we're going to be talking about systems integrators and their role in the transformation that's occurring in the airline industry today. And to talk about that in the studio, I've got Bert Craven, who will be well known to listeners of this podcast, who is the head of our technology practice and deputy CEO at T2RL. And making his podcast debut, we have Nick Moore, who is Vice President Global Partners at T2RL. And I'm going to steal Nick's line here, which that title means he's responsible for our relationships with anyone who doesn't have wings. So IT services companies, technology vendors, financial analysts, anyone who doesn't actually operate airplanes comes under Nick's purview. So gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're talking about systems integrators, at least in part because we have just published a white paper which we produced in conjunction with 6 companies that are very active in the field of systems integration with the airline industry. And in the course of researching that paper, we learned a lot about the systems integrator market, and we thought we would share it with our audience. So, Nick, I'll start with you. Can you define a systems integrator? What would a systems integrator look like if you stumbled on one in the dark?
IT services, very focused on technology and technology projects. I've always had the understanding that the business model was about bums on seats at a client and doing piecework, project work and so forth. And largely, I guess, but with the exception of the sort of the real big boys in the market, the TCSs and Accentures and stuff, it was done below the radar of senior management in any organisation. It was kind of, architecture and development work, and that was it. But they are prevalent, and I'm discovering new ones almost on a daily basis at the moment.
Yeah, we'll talk in a moment about the size of the market, because it is probably much more enormous than many people realize. But Bert, turning to you, Nick described the setup where IT services company were going to come in and do very fixed pieces of work. He described it as piecework. I think all of the big players in the market are very actively moving to evolve away from that model to a model where they're much more closely integrated and operating at a higher level with the customer airlines.
I don't know if it's evolve away, but certainly new models are emerging all the time. And systems integrators historically, all of them will do staff augmentation. You can buy inputs to your IT organization from systems integrators. You can also buy outputs. So you can have them take over and run projects, products, services within your IT organization. So they will do everything from simple staff augmentation all the way through to full business process outsourcing in some cases. And the idea of having a good framework partner like that is that they can adapt a single business relationship to solve multiple problems and bring both their domain vertical knowledge and their knowledge of your business to bear each time. So that you don't spend a huge amount of time onboarding new partners every time you want to do a project and having to teach them what a P&R is and what a BSM is and all the other things that you really would like a partner to know walking in the door.
Yeah, the model really got going, in my mind anyway, around 30 years ago when we started to see what were then just known as remote development shops, and airlines and other enterprises, of course, would contract out writing code to development shops, predominantly in India, although that model is also evolving. And, I personally was involved in some of that in the early days. I worked with World Network Services in India. And what we found as an airline development organization in Europe was that the effort involved in writing detailed specifications for the remote coders and then testing and integrating what they sent back actually made the economic benefit doubtful, shall we say. And so what has happened in, as far as I can see over the last 30 years is that gradually those remote shops have grown in their capabilities to the point where they actually understand the business, and you don't have to write the kind of specs that you talked about, telling them what is a PNR, what is a booking.
Yeah, there's definitely that, but what I would say is there's a sort of a slight caveat emptor to this is SIs in general have a huge range of engagement models and capabilities, and there is a responsibility on the buyer to consume those resources effectively. I've seen it, a number of times, it actually in a lot of different verticals where people go out to market for, SI, a framework partner, and they insist on only the most senior developers and experts and so on. And then they end up body shopping that resource, which ends up being very expensive. So it's about consuming the right services in the right way. And to the extent that the SIs are sort of an attachment to your IT organization, you have to think about spans of control, organizational design, all of those things. So if you've got one partner developing software, maybe you put your quality management organization with another partner, so they're marking each other's homework, that sort of thing. But it takes a degree of experience to learn how to consume these services effectively.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what's been going on over the last 2 or 3 decades.
Absolutely.
And people on both sides are getting more comfortable with the relationships and understand them better, and hence they're able to deliver more value from those relationships. Nick, you said that you keep discovering new SIs as you work through the market. And when we were producing the white paper, when we were researching it, I certainly dug up a couple of really quite astounding statistics, which tell me that the fact you keep discovering new ones is no real surprise. Something like 4 to 5 million people worldwide work in IT services companies that broadly come into the category we're talking about, and the total revenue for those companies is of the order of $500 billion a year. So we're really talking about very substantial bits of the economy here. So
these are some of the largest companies in the world. I mean,
yes.
If you look at companies like TCS, they're absolutely gigantic. I think they will, some of the records they've broken in terms of employees and revenue and so on are well documented.
Yeah.
And I think these bigger organizations have grown beyond the role of technology provider or developer and systems integrator to a far more mature relationship with their customer organizations. Going back to my previous life, we used to say if you're outsourcing, you can outsource everything except strategy, enterprise architecture, and governance. And the challenge is that a lot of end user enterprises aren't actually very good at that either. So having a decent third party partner to help with that is invaluable.
Yeah. No, I think if we think of IT as plan, build, and run, the build and the run are eminently outsourceable services, even advisedly outsourceable services for, organizations like airlines who, for a lot of reasons, tend to be very lean in IT, with some exceptions. I think going back to Ian's opening statement about transformation is that this is where organizations like the SIs come into their own, because even the most mature organization will struggle to transform itself. It is very difficult to do. If you're a very lean organization, and most airlines I've worked with have 0 dead weight, then you will self transformation is absolutely impossible. And so big partners who can do heavy lifting, who have domain knowledge, who have knowledge of your specific business, are an absolute must when, once a program gets above a certain size and a certain volume of change within the organization.
Yeah, and staying with the sort of the size of this activity within the economy, we find ourselves, working in our own world. We all love the airline industry. We all spend our time thinking about the airline industry, but it's a little bit sobering to think about just how small the airline industry is compared to
Oh yeah.
some of the other customers of the big IT services companies. And again, as we were researching the white paper, we looked into some of the statistics around this, and the biggest users are banking and finance, and then IT, telecom, manufacturing, government,
Yep.
and defense. So, and they're all way bigger than the airline industry.
The airline industry doesn't even qualify for its own vertical. I mean, we're lumped in with travel, transport, hospitality, and tourism, and then airlines are somewhere in that mix.
That's right.
Generally.
So where I was kind of going with that is that when an airline is looking to establish or develop an SI relationship, it's not just about the size and resources of the SI, it's also about its domain expertise.
Absolutely.
And the SIs that we worked with on the white paper have all got significant domain expertise in the travel and airline field. And interestingly, they ranged in size from an organization with just a few hundred employees up to one with like 300,000.
Yeah.
The point being that those few hundred are all airline people, and the 300,000 had maybe 5-10% with some exposure to our industry.
And I think with any of these things, you'll always find those niche specialists who are basically building a business around a particular niche specialism. And equally, you'll find, a lot of the medium to large SIs aren't just working for the airlines, they're working for the airline technology providers as well. So they're working on the other side of the table, they're developing the products that the airlines are buying, and therefore they're getting domain knowledge in from the other end of their business as well. And I think that's probably the single most important thing that when we're talking to airlines about the selection of partners is domain knowledge. Technology knowledge is eminently transferable and findable in the marketplace, but really good, deep airline knowledge is irreplaceable in these kinds of things.
I think there's something that runs alongside that as well. As the airline industry moves down this journey of transformation to the new retailing world, cultural fit is going to be critical, because it's going to be a long, difficult, and expensive and complex journey. And a mid-size or a smaller airline might not be comfortable having a relationship with a huge SI. They'll want a relationship with an organisation that has real skin in the game, and their success is predicated on the airline's success as well. And I think you get a much deeper relationship, which will endure.
Definitely, and that issue, that kind of larger fish in smaller pond, is definitely a consideration.
Yeah, I want to think as well about, and it touches on what Nick just said about the cultural fit. The kind of cliche of these IT services companies is that they're all based in India. They're in Bangalore or in Pune or wherever. And of course, there are some very large IT services companies based in India, but that's far from the picture now, is it, Nick? We're dealing with services companies based in the Americas, based in Eastern Europe, based all over the place.
Absolutely, and I think that just strengthens that position of on the cultural side as well. It's easier to deal with someone who's relatively close by, and if they have representatives in your in your territory as well, as many of these organisations do now have, the business analysts and relationships and stuff. locally. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think also that most of the larger ones now are multi-shore. So, places like Colombia and other countries in Latin America, Vietnam and the Philippines are sort of the new India. And so, what you want is kind of onshore, nearshore, offshore. You want activities that follow the sun. You want activities where there are opportunities to actually bring people into your office without flying them halfway around the world. And so, a lot of the big SIs now will have many tiers of ways of providing staff and resources.
So one of the things that the SIs all talk to us about when we're in the research phase is the challenge of airlines actually not knowing what they need, actually not being able to define the big projects. And all of the SIs we talked to had both a sort of initial consulting capability where they could actually come in and work with the airline to define what they needed. And then, of course, huge depth of resource for delivery. And to my mind, the more you develop that consulting capability, almost the higher up the food chain you're going. You're no longer just working with development directors or whatever.
No.
You're going up to the C-level in the airline and saying, what is it you want to achieve?
All the big SIs, I think, have been moving up the food chain, as it were. They want to have those strategic level organizations. They want to be working in the plan tier of IT, and they want to have relationships with the business units directly as well, if they can. So, and that's sort of absolutely normal. And I know the SIs have been moving a lot more into the strategic space that used to be the exclusive preserve of the Bains and the McKinseys and so on. And I think a lot of them have ambitions, and they also have ambitions in the direction of product as well. So while they might be developing products for airlines or developing products for vendors, there are a number of them who have spun out their own products that they now sell. So they become a product organization. And again, that's evidence of them having built up domain knowledge and saying, well, actually, this is now a sustainable business on its own, this actual product. So
yeah, I was actually going to come on to that as the sort of next topic, really, and that is the question of IPR and product development. And it's very clear from talking to the SIs we work with that there are different models in play. Some of them are very sort of pure, if you like, and saying that when we work for a client, the IPR that we develop belongs to the client, and that's the end of it. Others, as you say, are looking to build their own products and retain ownership of IPR that they develop. And of course, there are hybrid models anywhere in between.
And there's co-funding models and JV models. And I think that's one of the advantages of maybe a big SI partner is that they are probably more willing to discuss and invest in those kinds of special relationships than maybe smaller partners.
Yeah, and certainly again a thread that emerged in talking to the SIs was that some of the products they're developing are rather than being sort of direct customer facing products like offer management systems or pricing systems or whatever, they're actually tools and accelerators that can be applied across a range of industries, and maybe there will be a particular flavor for the airline industry. But I think that's quite significant. And of course, no podcast is complete without the obligatory mention of AI, and all of the SIs are talking about harnessing AI for their tools.
Yeah. Well, they've got to have something for all the blockchain people to do, so it's good that they've managed to repurpose them.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But certainly, some of the bigger ones have invested quite a lot. I mean, by our standards, a huge amount in infrastructure, centers of excellence, academies. All those things that
this is what we mean by
afford to do for itself.
That's right. And this is what we mean by domain knowledge. And one of the things about domain knowledge in terms of its richness of value is it's not just knowledge of a business model, or business data flows or business processes. It's knowledge of the vendors and the products. It's previous experience of having integrated products together. One of the big areas that a lot of the SIs play in is in enterprise system integration. And so if you've got a partner who has previously integrated with your PSS vendors' web services, or with your revenue management providers' APIs or whatever, the value of that knowledge, that not having to reinvent the wheel every time, is massively valuable in terms of efficiency. And I think those are the you talk about centers of excellence. It's the distillation of that knowledge into something that's designed to serve a very specific purpose, because SIs can feel very general and very generic. And it's really when we get to see those centers of excellence that we understand where the expertise really lies.
I was talking to someone recently, and they were very focused on the airline industry, and that they claimed that all of their airline facing people had industry experience at some level. He said, but if they found someone who is exceptional in other areas, they would pay for these people to go and do sort of 3-6 months on site with an airline or an airport or whatever part of the industry it was, to get that experience and understand exactly what the challenges and the technologies were in place. It's a great idea.
And they are useful conduits for things like industry knowledge and best practice to flow. Particularly when you've got high churn of IT staff in some places, the fact that you can go to a partner and be reasonably sure that they will have people with the right technical knowledge and the right blend of industry and business knowledge, is reassuring for people when they know they're in an uncertain market. The demands on them are massively variable, but the budgets are not, or the budgets for FTEs are not.
If we think about the reasons that airlines are likely to engage with systems integrators and IT services companies generally, a big part of it is because of the huge change that's happened in the structure of airline organizations over the last several decades. Go back to the sort of 1970s, 1980s, and an airline of any size would have a pretty substantial IT department that would be developing and implementing and so on and so on. And some still do. A small number of airlines still do have those significant,
very large IT functions, notably ones who tend to build and maintain their own systems.
But most
absolutely
don't. And so that's why these relationships.
They're normally very, very lean. I mean, I think it's obviously, I worked at EasyJet up until 2015. When I started there in 2008, EasyJet were around the 60 million passenger carrier, and there were 60 people in IT total, full-time employees. Very, very lean organizations. Obviously, framework partners supporting that, but in terms of actual employees, very small.
Yeah, and the IT services companies have really, I was going to say capitalized, but that sounds a bit underhanded. They have stepped into that requirement. And one of the ways they've done it, of course, is by establishing significant relationships with technical universities in India, in Latin America, in other places. And you've almost got a sort of conveyor belt approach going from the technical university into the big IT services companies and then out to clients.
Yes, and then a further conveyor belt taking them through all of the IT services.
Well, yes. Another one of the subjects that came up in the conversations we had with the SIs was kind of about that conveyor belt, about retention. And I think the SIs that we talk to are now putting a lot of effort into making an environment where employees are retained, and they're retained not just by paying them a little bit above market or whatever, but by giving them meaningful projects, meaningful ways of developing skills, and so on and so on. The sort of stuff that you used to do in an airline if you had an IT department of 1,000 or 2,000 people, but you can't really do with an IT department of 60.
Yeah, and I think certainly years ago when I was working with a lot of SIs, it really did feel like there was just a merry-go-round of people, and that within SIs, certainly the big Indian ones, there weren't really pay rises or promotions. The way you got a pay rise or promotion was you went to another SI, and then you went to another one, then you went to another one, and then 2 years later you were back at the first one again, except now you were a senior, whatever it was. And that's how you progressed your career, rather than sort of proper career planning and advancement within a single company.
Yeah, I think that is definitely changing, or at least if we can take at face value the conversations we had. Nick, you were in some of those conversations, and there was certainly, from the bigger players, certainly an emphasis in this sort of career development and retention.
Yeah, absolutely. It was structured, so these people had a defined route, and to follow and develop and so forth. And I thought, it sounded very positive, exactly for the reason that you talked about, Bert. There's historically in these organisations, there's a massive churn. They go from one to the other, and they pop up multiple times with different organisations. Retention is critical, and it's not just good for the employees; it's good for the customers, for the airlines.
Yeah, no, it's very
continuity of ratio.
It's that domain knowledge and continuity that is preserved in that way. As I say, the technical knowledge can be taught a lot more easily and will be acquired almost naturally. But the airline domain knowledge is the important thing to retain.
So let's kind of circle back to where we started. The rise in importance of systems integrators within the airline industry is somewhat tied to the transformation that the industry is trying to accomplish now. And one part of that transformation is that there's a consensus that it would be a good thing to move away from monolithic PSSs into more modular environments, and that's certainly something that IATA and others have been pushing. But if you're going to do that, you definitely need the skills that someone like a systems integrator is going to bring. I don't think we can rely on the technical staff of the component vendors to help you glue it all together in any meaningful way.
I think within your kind of IT capability model, you have to identify the skills that you need to have close to home and that are going to be critical. We've always said that airlines really, unless it's a really differentiating platform in the sense of competitive advantage, they should be buying solutions, not building them, but they should be world-class integrators. And more broadly, they need to be really good at vendor management. If you're going to outsource these services, managing vendors and knowing how to manage a lot of different vendors who may all have different modes of engagement, models of engagement with you, is really important. And thinking of it as the organizational design of an extended organization. So that has to really be given some thought, because you can engage with an SI in a very inefficient way. There is ample rope to hang yourself with. So I think it's that experience that airlines need, and having a very, very clear application and IT strategy in terms of what will we buy, what will we build, what do we invest in at home, what do we outsource, what do we insource, and so on. But I think back to your point about the transformation is that we've been going kind of modular and monolithic and insource, outsource, centralize, decentralize. These things come in cycles. But as we like to say, the airline industry is sort of there's a very long, slow, painful rate of change, punctuated by sudden flurries of activity. And we are on the upslope to a sudden flurry of activity now with OOSD. And the issue we've got is that this isn't going to be a technology change like a lot of the digital transformation stuff we've been doing over the past few years. This is going to be a massive business change. And if you thought that digital transformations required a bit of heavy lifting, this is going to contain some surprises.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And again, something that came up in the conversations that we had is that the remit goes way beyond the computer room. The remit goes into the business, and really quite deeply. And I think the SIs that we talk to pretty much all acknowledge that. In fact, it was practically the first thing any of them said was, this is not just about technology. This is about a whole business transformation.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. But yes, I mean, I think, airlines need to take stock, fairly urgently, and look at how they're set up as an organization undergoing transformation. Is the IT function that was really there, primarily as a kind of keeping the lights on organization, going to be able to step up into the role of transformational organization? And how does it need to be augmented with partners to become the scaffold, the structure around the business while the business transforms itself?
So where should an airline manage the SI relationship? Should it be IT that does that, or should it be the commercial organization, or should it be the CEO?
So I mean, certainly if you're in tiers 1 and 2 as an airline, and probably some of the larger tier 3s, you need to think about implementing a proper supplier relationship management framework, which is where you basically classify all of your providers and partners by a set of criteria like volume of spend, business criticality of services, all those kinds of things. And then you allocate those vendors according to the framework, and you say, this vendor is sufficiently important that they need senior executive engagement. Above IT, this needs to be a CFO, CEO level conversation some of the time, if a partner is sufficiently large and sufficiently critical.
And that in itself is a challenge for the airlines, because all these people are very busy doing their day jobs, keeping the airline running. And that brings in the core requirement of good governance. If you are put in a position where you have these influence and authority, then you have to take it seriously.
Yeah, but it's like, your CEO doesn't talk to the company who provide you with nuts and bolts, but they do talk to Boeing, and it's saying how important is the relationship? How big is it? How critical is it?
Yeah.
And just it doesn't have to be a massively complex framework, but you do have to look at certainly the top tier of providers. There's going to be a long tail that fall into the bottom of the framework, but there are going to be some top tier, and some of those are going to be IT partners. And it's about looking at that and thinking about, how do we performance manage this vendor? How do we manage them against our long-term strategic business goals?
And this is where I think that this is a real opportunity for the systems integrators, because they are connected.
Yes.
Pretty much
and to go and do a reset. This is going to be a point in time where there is an unusual level of focus on what's going on in IT because of the OOSD transformation. It will naturally have executive focus and probably a greater executive willingness to engage. So I do think that's true. And I think also, you do get this problem where there's a sort of a knowledge gap, where the SI is turning up to help. And Ian, as you said, the airline don't really need to seem to know what they want. And certainly our advice is, don't let the person who's going to build the thing tell you what it is that you want. That's the wrong span of control, because the incentives are not aligned there. If you're not sure what you want, bit of advice from us, come and talk to T2RL, because we've spent a lot of time writing down the kinds of things that airlines should want, and a lot of time helping airlines decide what they want. Then once you've decided what you want, then go and talk to the appropriate partners.
Yeah, and I guess another thing just to touch on before we close is that an airline of any significant size is likely to have a relationship with more than one IT services company, and you've got to have the sort of governance in place to understand the kind of pyramid of responsibilities there. You might have one lead integrator,
definitely lead supplier in any category, no question.
Who is then managing resources from another, and those things are all manageable, but they need some thought and planning and structure.
Absolutely, they are complex, and the point is, they will happen either by accident or by design. By design is much better.
Yes,
with a good contract to
absolutely
support
with a good contract, Nick. Yes,
yeah, and that's a beautiful segue, because of course, if T2RL is about anything, it's about trying to help airlines achieve good contractual relationships with the people they're working with.
Yeah. And having multiple partners is not a bad thing. Well, again, going back to this spans of control and having people marking each other's homework rather than their own. And to a certain extent, keeping each other on their toes. What you don't want is one massive partner who's sort of resting on their laurels. You want partners who are vying for each bit of work. They may be your framework partner, but they're not guaranteed every crumb off the table.
Which is probably a good place to wrap up. Crumbs on tables. Maybe that's the way the big IT services companies see the airline industry, just the crumbs on the table compared to their banking and government and whatever. But
it's very sad because we're so exciting to work with.
Exactly. For us, it's our exciting universe that we all know and love. I think that's been an interesting conversation. It's been a little bit rambling, but then that's what we do. I hope it's been interesting to the listeners, and I hope it's interesting also to some of the SIs that we work with. I will just point out that the white paper we've been talking about is publicly available on t2rl.net. You don't have to be a T2RL subscriber to read this one.
If .com, I think, isn't it?
Is it on .com?
So
I do apologise. It's on .com. There you go. We're so
and
big.
And LinkedIn as well.
And yes, it's been published on LinkedIn, or it's been linked on LinkedIn. So if what we've had to say over the last half an hour or so has piqued your interest, by all means, download the paper and have a look at it, and have a look at
reach out. We're very happy to talk.
Indeed, reach out to us, and we're very happy to talk about all of this stuff until the cows come home. So with that, I'll thank Nick, and I'll thank Bert, and I'll thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to talking to you in the next issue of T2RL Talks.